In anatomy class, you studied the location of the organs and their functions. The word anatomy literally means to dissect. In ancient times, you did anatomy. You cut up things to find out what they were made of. Today, we can take an anatomy class without literally dissecting anything, with the help of models and computer software. Physiology builds on what you learned in anatomy. In anatomy, you studied how the structure of the heart relates to its function. In physiology, we will study how the function of the heart relates to maintaining stable conditions within the body that are supportive for life. Whereas anatomy is the study of the relationship of structure to function, physiology is the study of the relationship of function to survival. Why don't you pour yourself a hot cup of coffee? I'll wait. Did you ever wonder in what ways you are similar to and different from a hot cup of coffee? You and your coffee have at least one thing in common. You're both well above room temperature. Your body temperature is about 100 degrees Fahrenheit, or 37 degrees Celsius. Your McDonald's coffee may be 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Don't spill it. If you must abandon your hot cup of coffee for an hour or so, your coffee will most likely be at room temperature when you return. Your temperature, meanwhile, will be essentially unchanged. This illustrates an important difference between the living and the non-living. Living things regulate internal conditions such as body temperature. Non-living things rapidly equilibrate to their environment. At death, our body temperature behaves the same as our hot cup of coffee. Homeostasis is the name we apply to the ability of living things to maintain stable internal conditions despite hostile environments. Homeostasis means stable state. Let's say you were outside when a thunderstorm rolled in. There was lightning and thunder and hail and rain. To protect yourself, you opened your umbrella and headed for shelter. Along the way, you tripped on a rock and fell to the ground, fracturing your femur and splitting the rock in two. Your body soon stops the bleeding and the infection, and in a few weeks your femur has healed and is now intact. However, the rock that you tripped over and split in two is still in two pieces. The rock has no ability to repair itself if damaged, unlike our bodies. Here you are viewing a map of how the body maintains stable internal states. Those internal states that we must maintain within a narrow range to survive are called essential variables. It's essential for survival that they not vary too much. Body temperature is an essential variable that must be kept near 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Other essential variables include blood pressure, the water concentration of body fluids, blood glucose levels, blood calcium levels, the pH of the body fluids, the energy charge inside cells, and so forth. To stabilize these variables, we need to monitor them. That is the job of sensors. We have sensors that monitor blood pressure, others that monitor body temperature, others that monitor blood calcium levels. These sensors report to a decision center, often the brain, where the desired value of the essential variable is stored. We call the desired value of an essential variable its set point. Think of your home heating and air conditioning system. You set the thermostat to the temperature you desire. That value is called the set point, or operating point, or the desired value of the essential variable. For blood sugar, the set point is normally around 90 milligrams of glucose per deciliter of plasma. If the actual value of an essential variable deviates from the set point, the difference is called an error signal. The error signal results in a response that attempts to prevent further deviation from the set point and to return the essential variable to the set point. If our body temperature rises above set point, we may sweat to bring it down. If our body temperature falls below set point, we may shiver to bring it up. Note the green circle that connects the different parts of our homeostatic loop. The green circle illustrates what is called feedback, the ability of a control system to monitor the effects of its own behavior. Feedback prevents a control system from responding excessively to a change in the essential variable and overshooting the set point. Feedback helps to prevent our response to low body temperature from becoming a body temperature that is too hot. Your home heating and air conditioning system uses many of the same elements as your body in keeping your home temperature stable. Our home thermostat allows us to set our home temperature to whatever is most comfortable. Here we have a thermostat set at 20 degrees. That may seem a bit cool until you recognize that this is degrees Celsius, not Fahrenheit. To convert to Fahrenheit, we must multiply 20 degrees Celsius by 1.8 because there's 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit in a degree Celsius. Then we must add 32 because the freezing point of water in the Celsius system is 0, whereas the freezing point of water in the Fahrenheit system is 32 degrees. The result is 20 degrees Celsius is actually 68 degrees Fahrenheit. So we've set 20 degrees Celsius as our set point. Notice that the room temperature has fallen below our set point. The difference between the set point and the actual temperature is called an error signal. The thermostat recognizes the error signal and tells the heater to switch on. As the heater puts out heat, the room temperature increases and reaches set point. As the temperature rises above set point, a new error signal is generated and results in the heater being switched off, preventing the room temperature from becoming too hot. This is what we call feedback. As your home loses heat to the environment, your room temperature will fall below set point, and the new error signal will reactivate the heater. If we monitored closely your room temperature, it would look like this. The temperature goes up, and then it comes down. It goes up, and then it comes down. The line in the center represents the set point. To keep the temperature near set point, the control system uses these small deviations above and below the set point to instruct the heater to turn on or turn off. The type of feedback important to most control systems is known as negative feedback. Negative feedback says no to a change from set point. As our room temperature rises above set point, the control system says, no, stop, come back. As it falls below set point, it says, no, stop, come back. Occasionally, an alternative form of feedback dominates for a brief period of time. This is called positive feedback. Positive feedback says yes to a change or a behavior. Imagine you are sitting in your car in the sun with your window halfway up. As the interior of your car warms, you roll down the window. This is negative feedback. You are resisting the rise in temperature. You are saying no to the rise in temperature. But if you rolled up your car window instead, you would be saying yes to the rise in temperature. This is positive feedback. There are only a few situations in the body where positive feedback is important, and it is limited to a brief time. Let's say you haven't eaten in a while, and your tummy starts growling. You start to think about food, and the thought of food intensifies your hunger. Positive feedback. You head to the cafeteria. As you enter the cafeteria, the smell and the sight of food makes you even more hungry. Positive feedback. Finally, as you consume food, the positive feedback response diminishes. If it continued unabated, you would eat yourself into obesity. A similar positive feedback loop is involved in sexual arousal. Foreplay can have a positive feedback effect that leads to intercourse. Sexual intercourse has a positive feedback effect that leads to orgasm. The orgasm is the climax of the positive feedback loop. Instead of more intercourse, you're ready for sleep. If the positive feedback loop didn't end, you wouldn't have time to study. When you get the results of your exams, you are getting feedback. If I warn you that if you don't study, you would do poorly on the exams, I am giving you feed-forward information. Studying for an exam is feed-forward behavior. Getting the results of an exam is feedback. Feed-forward information can help us avoid many unwanted events, like failing an exam. If you step into the street and get run over by a truck, all the king's horses and all the king's men and all the feedback loops won't be capable of keeping you alive. Instead, we are advised to look both ways before we step into the street. Looking to see that our path is clear before we step into the street is a feed-forward behavior. It allows us to avoid being hit by a vehicle. Similarly, we may check the weathercast before we leave home so we can dress appropriately. Or we may take a sack lunch and water with us on a hike into the woods in anticipation of our getting hungry and thirsty. Feed-forward reactions allow us to avoid changes before they occur. Feedback reactions are responses to changes after they occur. Our body is composed of different levels of organization. Nevertheless, we exist as the intact organism, or what is called the organism as a whole. But we can subdivide this organism as a whole into smaller and smaller units. For example, we can divide the organism into 11 different systems. The system shown here is the digestive system. The digestive system is composed of organs. The stomach is an organ of the digestive system. The liver is an organ of the digestive system, as are the small and the large intestines. The organs are composed of simpler units called tissues. Different tissues include epithelial tissues and connective tissues. Tissues are composed of cells and cellular secretions. The cell is considered the fundamental living unit. We actually start out in life as a single cell. Today, we're composed of trillions of cells. Cells, in turn, are made up of smaller units called organelles, little organs, such as the mitochondrion, shown here. The cell and its organelles are composed of simpler units called chemicals. Here are the chemical levels of organization. They include large molecules, so-called macromolecules, like protein and DNA, smaller molecules like water and amino acids and carbon dioxide. Meanwhile, the molecules are composed of simpler units called atoms. Atoms of different elements combine to form molecules. The major elements in the body include carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, and a couple dozen others. These are the different levels of organization that we'll be studying throughout the semester. Here you see 10 of the 11 systems found within the human body. The skeletal system serves as a scaffolding for the body and as protective armor. If it weren't for your skeletal system, you'd be a quivering pile of jello on the floor. Some of you may be on exam day. The muscular system enables movement of the skeleton. Those Friday night creature features that show skeletons chasing hapless victims are misleading. Skeletons can't move without muscles. The circulatory or cardiovascular system is our internal river distributing nutrients and waste products throughout the body. The digestive system disassembles our food so we can absorb nutrients. The urinary system enables the disposal of waste products from the bloodstream. The nervous system is a rapid means of communication within the body. The endocrine system is an older means of communication that is not as rapid as the nervous system. Plants have an endocrine system, but no nervous system. Animals have both, and that's why they're called animals, because the nervous system enables rapid movement, animation. The reproductive system allows us to produce offspring that can replace us when we're gone. There are two distinct reproductive systems, but most people have only one. The lymphatic or defense system keeps microorganisms from consuming us for lunch. The respiratory system allows for gas exchange between the blood and the atmosphere. I said there were 11 systems commonly ascribed to the body. Which system was not shown here? If you look in a mirror, you can see the 11th system. It's the integumentary system, which includes our skin, hair, and nails. The integument keeps the good things in and the bad things out. Each of the systems can be subdivided into organs. Here you are viewing the urinary system. The principal organs of the urinary system are the two kidneys, located rather surprisingly high in the abdominal cavity. The kidneys filter the blood and produce urine. The urine is moved to its storage site via these tubes called the ureters. The ureters conduct the urine to the urinary bladder located here in the pelvic cavity. The urinary bladder stores urine until it's socially acceptable to allow it to pass, and then the urine passes out of the body via the tube called the urethra. These are the organs of the urinary system. Here you're looking at organs of the skeletal system, the individual bones. The bone of the forehead is called the frontal bone. This bone is called the humerus. It is located between your shoulder and your elbow. This bone is one of the bones of the vertebral column, a vertebra. Do you know from which region of the vertebral column this vertebra is from? Look here. See these facets? There's another one here. There's one over here on the transverse process. These are facets for articulating with ribs. So this must be a thoracic vertebra. Down below is the cuboid bone. Where would you find the cuboid? In your ankle. It's a tarsal bone. Here you see one of the organs of the muscular system, the deltoid. There are more than 600 named skeletal muscles in our bodies. You probably remember all of them from anatomy. Organs can be divided into smaller parts called tissues. Think of an organ like a layer cake. Here we have a layer cake with a layer of chocolate on the bottom. Above it is a layer of frosting. Then we have a layer of lemon cake, and on top of that another layer of frosting. And then we have a layer of white cake. On top of it we have another layer of frosting. And then we have a layer of lime cake. And most likely we'll have another layer of frosting on top of it. In addition, we have a candle stuck into the cake. Each of these layers and the candle can be thought of as a different type of tissue of this cake. The study of tissues is called histology, histos being the Greek word for tissue. In our bodies, there are 4 major types of tissues that compose the various organs. There are epithelia, whose major function is to line surfaces. Connective tissues act as the glue that holds us together. If your diet lacks vitamin C, you will not be able to produce connective tissue, and you will come unglued. The disease is called scurvy. At one time, scurvy was thought to be a venereal disease, or STD. Now we realize it is a nutritional deficiency disease. Neural tissues allow us to communicate within the body. Muscle tissues contract and can generate or prevent movement. Any organ is a combination of these 4 types of tissues. Here you are viewing the heart, an organ of the cardiovascular system. We can analyze the tissue composition of the heart like we did our layer cake. Here is a section of the wall of the heart. The outer layer is composed of an epithelium. Beneath the epithelium, shown here in yellow, is a layer of connective tissue. Beneath the connective tissue is a thick layer of muscle tissue, cardiac muscle. That's responsible for contraction and movement of the blood out of the heart. Below the muscular layer of the heart is another connective tissue layer, and lining the internal surface of the heart is another epithelium, usually called an endothelium because it lines an internal surface. What is not shown here is nervous tissue. Nervous tissue penetrates the wall of the heart, like the candle stuck in the cake, bringing innervation to the muscular layer of the heart. We can do a similar analysis with essentially any organ of the body. Tissues are composed of cells and cell secretions. The cell is considered the simplest living unit. Most of the organisms on Earth are composed only of a single cell. We are composed of trillions of interdependent cells, and so are known as multicellular organisms. Nevertheless, most of the cells associated with our bodies are not our own cells. They are unicellular organisms, mostly bacteria, that reside on our surface and in our gut. It is estimated that there are 10 times as many unicellular microbes on our body than there are cells that compose our bodies. As long as we are alive, our defense system usually keeps these microbes from causing disease and consuming us. After death, though, it is a different story. Cells are composed of simpler units called organelles, meaning little organs. Organelles are specialized regions performing specialized functions. On the surface of the cell, we have the plasma membrane. The plasma membrane separates the inside from the outside of the cell and regulates what can enter and leave the cell. Inside the cell, we have organelles such as mitochondria, the so-called powerhouse of the cell, the site where the cell's usable energy, ATP, is produced. We have ribosomes inside the cell where proteins are manufactured. We have lysosomes, the so-called garbage disposal of the cell. They contain digestive enzymes that break down worn cellular parts, as well as microorganisms that may have invaded the cell. Inside the nucleus, we have organelles called chromosomes that contain the genetic material we inherit from our parents. The cell and its organelles are composed more simply of chemicals, including atoms and molecules. That is why chemistry is a prerequisite for this course. Many people think of chemicals as something evil, something to avoid, like a coronavirus. However, without regular consumption of chemicals from our environment, we would quickly die. When we breathe, we exchange chemicals with our environment. We consume food for the chemicals contained within the food. These chemicals are euphemistically called nutrients. Some organizations try to frighten the public about the chemicals for profit. Here, for example, is an advertisement promoting chemophobia from the Florida orange growers.
Hey, a new drink. Ingredients: high fructose corn syrup, inositol, pyridoxine hydrochloride, maltodextrin, glucurono something or other, and of course my favorite, caffeine. Or Florida orange juice. Ingredients: fresh air, rain, sunshine.
A glass of Florida orange juice every morning is a natural way to get many of the nutrients you need. Florida orange juice.
The orange juice commercial is an example of chemophobia, an attempt to terrorize the public about chemicals in their food. For example, inositol is an important nutrient that, if not in our food, will have to be manufactured inside our body. Pyridoxine hydrochloride is an essential nutrient, more commonly called vitamin B6. Meanwhile, the nutrient that orange juice is most famous for, vitamin C, has a scary international name: 1,2-dihydroxyethyl 3,4-dihydroxyfuran. Obviously, you can't judge whether you should be consuming a chemical merely because it has a technical sounding name. Even water, which is the principal ingredient of orange juice, has a technical name. The next time you're at a restaurant, ask for a glass of dihydrogen monoxide. Even though you're requesting a glass of water, you may be asked to leave. The ad says orange juice is made of fresh air, rain, and sunshine. But fresh air is a mixture of chemicals. Rain is mostly water, dihydrogen monoxide, that orange trees absorb from the soil along with dissolved solutes. Sunshine is the energy the plant uses to make the chemicals in oranges. There's an old saying in toxicology: what makes a poison is the dose. Moreover, how the dose is administered will affect whether a substance is a poison. Take, for example, the botulism toxin. Here is a substance with toxin in its name, so you are forewarned to avoid it. If I had toxin in my name, you probably wouldn't enroll in my class. Botulism toxin is the most deadly toxin known to humans. You could hold 1 gram of botulism toxin on the tip of your finger, yet this tiny amount would be enough to kill 14,000 people if swallowed, 1,000,000 people if inhaled, or 8 million people if injected. And botulism toxin is 100% natural, purely organic, made by a species of bacteria called Clostridium botulinum. They could sell it at natural grocers without changing their name. Despite its toxicity, botulism toxin has been found to have therapeutic uses. If injected locally, it can relax spastic muscles. It has been used to treat chronic migraines, overactive bladder, and excessive sweating. It is used routinely, cosmetically, to reduce the wrinkles in an aging face. Another old adage is that one person's food is another person's poison. Most people can eat a banana without problems. However, some people suffer severe sensitivities to the natural chemicals in bananas and can die if they bite into one. The same is true of peanuts. Some people are allergic to cow's milk. Many others cannot digest milk sugar once they reach adulthood. When these people consume milk, they have a bad reaction. And then they commonly proclaim that milk is bad for everyone and that no one should drink it. What they are doing is projecting their personal reactions onto other people, trying to deprive others of the many nutrients that are abundant in dairy products. They overgeneralize, ignoring what I call the principle of individuality. The principle of individuality says that no two people are the same in all details. If we look closely enough, we can always find differences. Even identical twins can be differentiated if we look closely enough. I've had 2 sets of identical twins in my classes over the years, and although they could have come to class disguised as the other twin and fooled me, they assured me that they could not fool their parents. One of the more extreme variations among humans is what is called situs inversus. This is where the inside of a person is the exact opposite of what is taught in the textbooks. Instead of the liver being in the right upper quadrant, in a situs inversus person, the liver is in the left upper quadrant. Instead of the heart facing to the left in a normal person, in a situs inversus person, the apex of the heart faces to the right. The result is the right lung is smaller than the left. About 1 in 10,000 people are situs inversus, and many don't even know it. We are at least as different on the inside as we are on the outside. That is why a nutritious food for one person may be the Last Supper for another. We pretty much know the chemical composition of the human body. For example, we're mostly water by weight. We're about 60% water by weight, which means that if you weigh 154 pounds or 70 kilograms, you're walking around with more than 40 kilograms of water in you, or more than 90 pounds of water. Water is considered the most essential of all the nutrients. You can only survive for a few days without water. For most adults, fat is the second most abundant molecular component of the body. For a relatively lean adult, fat represents about 20% of their total weight. So if you weighed 150 pounds, you'd be walking around with 30 pounds of fat in you. Just be glad you don't have to carry it around in a bucket. Protein for most adults is the third most abundant chemical ingredient. About 15% of our weight is protein. All of that protein is manufactured within the body. And about half of that protein is in our muscles. Nucleic acids like DNA represent about 2% of our body weight. Minerals like calcium and phosphorus about 2%. And carbohydrates, primarily glucose, about 1%. Now that we know the chemical composition of the body, let's go to the store. Let's buy up all the chemicals that we need to make a human body and put them in a vat. There goes the water, now the protein, now the fats, the carbohydrates, don't forget the minerals, and the nucleic acids. And we also have to bring the temperature up to about 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And then we're going to wait about 9 months. And it's a baby. What's wrong with this scenario? What are we missing? Well, to figure it out, we need to reverse engineer life. Here we have a living, breathing, fly-catching frog. Now let's run this frog through a blender. Look away if you must. What do we have now? Campbell's frog soup. We no longer have a living, breathing frog, but we do have lunch. All the chemicals that were in the frog are still there inside this can of frog soup. So what did we change? When we ran the frog through the blender, we scrambled the parts. We changed the relationship of the parts, and as a result, we altered the function. What this illustrates is that life is not a random collection of chemicals. Instead, it is a highly organized system of chemicals. Change the organization, and you can change the function. Another way of saying it is, life is more than the sum of its parts. When the parts go together in a certain way, a new characteristic emerges, a characteristic we call the living state. Let's set free our fantasy life and suppose you won the Missouri lottery. Your first act as a millionaire is to call a car dealership and order their most expensive new car. A few days later, they deliver your new car. They put the engine in your driveway. The tires beside your house, the battery on your doorstep, the steering wheel in your mailbox. You look at this assortment of parts and say, "What is this mess?" They say, "It's your new car." You say, "No, it isn't. These are new car parts. I ordered a new car, something I could drive around in. I can't drive around in new car parts." You need to take these parts and assemble them in a very specific way so that a new characteristic emerges, drivability, and then return the car to me. So they take the car parts back and they assemble them in a very specific way, and as a result, something brand new emerges that was not present in a random collection of parts or any individual part. That new characteristic we call drivability. In kindergarten, we're taught that 1 plus 1 equals 2, 2 plus 1 equals 3, 3 plus 1 equals 4. This is true when it comes to buying concert tickets, but in real life, it's not always true. 1 liter of water, for example, added to 1 liter of alcohol yields less than 2 liters of mixture. And 1 male bunny rabbit added to 1 female bunny rabbit in a few weeks results in many more than 2 rabbits. And then there's the final straw. We're going to place straws on the back of this camel because we have nothing better to do. And for a while, it's rather dull. Nothing seems to be happening, and we're starting to get bored. And then all of a sudden, something bizarre, something dramatic happens. We add 1 more straw, and suddenly the camel's back breaks. That last straw had an effect far greater than the preceding straws. It had a non-additive effect, a non-plus-1 effect. We call it the straw that broke the camel's back. You may experience this too if you enroll in 1 too many classes, or if you have 1 too many kids, or if you take on 1 too many responsibilities at work. You can end up failing your classes, or end up in divorce court, end up with the state taking away your kids, or you may experience a nervous breakdown and lose your job. What that means is that life is more than the sum of its parts. We are a non-additive result of the specific interaction of our bodily parts. If you fell into a blender and your parts were randomized, you would no longer be alive. But your chemicals are all still there. Let's say you didn't win the lottery and your car won't start. You call the dealership and they try to sell you a new car for 25 grand. You tell them you're a poor student. Can't you fix my car? They refer you to the mechanic shop, who sends over a mechanic to inspect your car. The mechanic checks to see if there's gas in your gas tank. He checks your ignition switch to make sure it's making contact. He checks your spark plugs to see if they're fouled. He checks your battery to see if it's charged. Oh, there's your problem. You have a dead battery. You ask, well, can you fix it? He replies, we can install a new battery for about $100. The result is that you save $24,900. This was made possible only because the mechanic was trained to evaluate your car on simpler levels of organization. He knew what the parts were supposed to do and how to determine if they were doing it. The same principle applies to our body. Suppose you weren't feeling well, so you went to your doctor and you said, "Doctor, I don't feel well." What if the doctor responded by saying, "I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll run you through the shredder and have your parents make another kid." You might respond, "But doctor, I'm too young to be run through the shredder, and my parents are too old to be making more kids. Isn't there something you can do for me?" The doctor may scratch his head and say, "Come to think of it, that is why I went to medical school. Thanks for reminding me." So the doctor asks you about your symptoms and prescribes some tests. And as a result, the doctor comes back to you and says, "You have a defective endocrine system. And you say, well, doctor, can you replace my endocrine system? And the doctor says, well, actually, most of your endocrine system is working just fine. There is, however, a particular organ in your endocrine system called the pancreas that's not doing the job it's supposed to do. So you say, well, doctor, can you replace my pancreas? And the doctor says, actually, most of your pancreas is doing fine. It's producing an absolutely essential digestive juice. There is, however, a tissue type in your pancreas, an epithelium, that's not doing what it's supposed to do. In this epithelium, we find cells called beta cells. It's the beta cells that aren't functioning normally. In the beta cells, there are organelles called ribosomes that are responsible for protein synthesis. The ribosomes in the beta cells of your pancreas are not manufacturing a chemical, a protein called insulin, which in turn is needed to regulate glucose, a chemical that circulates in your bloodstream. As a result, you have extremely elevated blood glucose levels. Of course, at this point, your eyeballs are going in circles. You have no idea what the physician is talking about because you haven't completed physiology yet. And you say, doctor, can you help me? And the doctor says, sure. I'll write you a prescription for insulin. You can get it filled at the pharmacy, and in a few days, you should feel just fine. Which, of course, was all you wanted to do anyway. You didn't want all that gobbledygook about levels of organization and so forth. But for the doctor to properly diagnose you, the doctor had to be able to evaluate your body on simpler levels of organization, find out the part or parts that weren't doing their job, and address those deficiencies with some type of medical intervention, such as a prescription. Do you know what disease this person was diagnosed with? The disease just described was diabetes mellitus, which is among the 10 leading causes of death in the United States. You're viewing the leading killers in the United States in 2019. Topping the list is heart disease, which has been the #1 killer each year since 1920. In 2019, 23 out of every 100 deaths was from heart disease. Next on the list of killers is cancer, which has been the second leading killer in the United States every year since 1938. Heart disease and cancer account for nearly half of all yearly deaths. Third on the list are accidents, about half of which are motor vehicle accidents. In fourth place is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, which includes emphysema. Next is stroke, also called cerebrovascular accident or brain attack. In sixth place is a type of dementia called Alzheimer's disease. In seventh place is diabetes mellitus, also known as sugar diabetes. The type of diabetes just described is called type 1 because the source of the problem was the inability of the pancreas to produce insulin. Most diabetics, however, have what is known as type 2 diabetes, where insulin is not the problem. In eighth place was kidney disease, followed by influenza and pneumonia. The flu and pneumonia are classified together because the flu usually kills by acting as a gateway disease to pneumonia. Finally, in 10th place is suicide. Note that homicide is not among the 10 leading killers, although it receives far more attention in the news than suicide. These 10 leading killers account for about 3/4 of all deaths in the United States.